Those who advocate against animal abuse are directly linked with those who advocate against the abuse of people. Every living thing is connected. There are many times when advocating for people can appear in an unexpected form, such as a dog that's being mistreated. This is something the members of the Church of the Good Shepherd's Budget Committee are about to find out as they prepare to end their Zoom meeting.
Boy, on these longer days, I got to remember to have lunch.
This
I
was
am
long,
starving.
Yeah, I had so
I really
much to
want-
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to take a run. My blood
Yeah.
is killing me. I
I'm
need
so
it.
glad we got done early. This is
You know?
my first Zoom meeting. Have you guys done Zoom before?
I have not. This is the first
Yeah.
one for me.
Yeah,
very
yeah, it's
interesting.
Pretty well, though.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really
Right.
wasn't so bad.
I've just
Like,
checked the
it's just-
numbers
Yeah.
that we've been
been
working
really-
with tonight.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Is everybody still with me?
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
here.
Yeah,
All right,
we're here.
Once again, we've managed to balance the church's budget, at least for this month. And we have $300 left that we don't necessarily have to assign to anything tonight. So this has been a very good evening's work. Thank you all.
Glad to hear it, Fran. I suggest we let that money remain unassigned for a while. It's good to know it's available if there's some kind of emergency.
Or we could use it to start that Help the Community Fund we've always talked about.
Hey, Jim, that's a great idea.
You're welcome. Now, I, for one, will be glad to end a little earlier than we normally do from a budget meeting.
Hey, I have to sign out too, but before we end, I'd like to ask something of the committee, if you don't mind, Fran.
Certainly, please go on, Millie.
Oh, hey, Billy. Is everything okay? I noticed you seemed a bit distracted this evening. Not your usual self.
I'm sorry. I am a little distracted. Believe it or not, I have to meet with, of all people, Duke Morrington in less than an hour.
Who's Duke Morrington?
He's the local person who has a reputation for causing trouble. He doesn't come to our church.
Why are you meeting with him, Millie?
Not because I enjoy his company, Jim, that's for sure, but there is a connection between my meeting with him and the question I have. You see, I'm buying a dog from him. You know how I love dogs, and she's so
Did
cute.
you say dog, Millie?
I did. She's some kind of a mix. He bought or found or more likely stole, and he's got her chained to a tree in his yard, and the only shelter she has is an overturned wheelbarrow. He doesn't feed her regularly, and her water bowl, from what I can tell, is mostly dry.
You've seen the situation for yourself, Millie. It isn't hearsay.
I walk past his place almost every day to catch my ride to work, Fran. A few weeks ago, I heard the dog crying, and when I realized that Morton's truck was gone, I took a chance and snuck into the backyard, and I found her. When she first saw me, she cowered in the dirt, but she's not afraid of me anymore because I bring her tidbits regularly, and I speak to her kindly when she's gone. She's such a sweet, sweet dog. Oh, and Mrs. Mason, Morton's neighbor.
You mean the Mrs. Mason who attends our church on Sunday? She sits in the third row?
Yeah, she always wears a purple or pink sweater, pretty much. Okay, well, she's been giving the dog food when he's not around. She keeps watching the situation from her kitchen window, and even though there's nothing she can do about it, she is seeing this every day. So I'm giving you facts, Fran, not gossip.
You're lucky that Morrington hasn't pulled a shotgun on you for trespassing. After all, whether you agree with how he's treating the dog or not, at the end of the day, our legal system makes it clear it's his property.
I am sad to say that you're right, Jim. And because he only views the dog as property, Morrington has agreed to sell her to me for $150.
No offense, Millie, but I know that you don't have that kind of money. I hope this dog is worth it.
She's at least 2 or 3 years old. She's obviously been bred several times. She's underweight. Her coat is a mess, and she may have medical issues. And she's suffering through no fault of her own, and I can't keep letting that happen. It's true. I don't have money to spare, so I'd like to ask the Church of the Good Shepherd to donate a small amount, maybe $100 to help with her care. I can't take her home because my apartment complex doesn't allow dogs over 15 pounds, and it's obvious that she should weigh closer to 40 pounds instead of the 30 pounds or so she probably weighs now. I found someone who can foster her until I find a forever home, and I want to give the foster some money for dog food and to help cover some of the vet expenses that are going to occur. I thought this was exactly the right group to ask.
I cannot believe that you would think that our church, that any church, would donate money to help you with dog rescue. Can you believe this, Fran?
Thank you, Millie.
What?
Why don't you call animal control, Millie, or one of the animal shelters in this area that help in these situations? After all, there are plenty of them around.
A couple of reasons, Helen. You know that Morton has a reputation for getting back at anyone who, in his mind, crosses him. If animal control or a shelter come knocking at his door, he will likely suspect that either me or Mrs. Mason contacted them. I think I can deal with him, but Mrs. Mason has tangled with him before, and she's very hesitant to do so again. She lives alone and only has a small pension, so she can't afford lawsuits or security cameras.
This guy's a bully, damn it. This calls for the police.
He hasn't made threats yet, Gary. His history tells me he will, but I can't call the police about something that hasn't happened. And as Jim reminded us, the police have little jurisdiction over what he does with his property unless he takes it to an extreme.
And starving a dog isn't extreme?
If Morton tells animal control her ribs were showing when he got her, they'll have to give him the benefit of the doubt, and it could be a month or two before they can check on the situation again. Besides, some people would simply label her as lean and tell me to mind my own business.
And they'd be right. Most people overfeed their dogs anyway.
The other reason I don't want to call the police or animal control is since it could take a few days or several visits before they act. That would give Morton time to carry out a warning he used to bully Mrs. Mason the other day. He said that if he can't sell the dog soon, he'll give her to a friend who is a dog man.
That's code for dog fighting. It's illegal in this state.
It may be illegal, Garrett, but it certainly hasn't been stamped out. I'm afraid that sin is as old as time.
Can't you take her to a no-kill rescue once you've bought her from Morton? Then you would need to ask for money to keep her.
Maybe, but have any of you been to one of the local shelters or rescue facilities lately? Well, I volunteer at one when I have the time, and they are overflowing with cast-off animals. Puppies, kittens, purebred animals, mixes. There are dogs that haven't been properly socialized. Dogs that are so terrified they hide from potential adopters. Dogs with skin diseases and heartworm that no one wants to spend money on. Older dogs that aren't cute and cuddly enough to attract people's attention, and some with fur so matted and filthy they can hardly move. Oh, and the people who work at these shelters are so overwhelmed trying to help these dogs, and I can solve this dog situation without burdening them any further.
I don't understand why we're even discussing this. If Millie is crazy enough to spend money she doesn't have to rescue some mongrel, that's her problem, not ours. I don't know why you thanked her, Reverend. As everyone on this call is aware, or should be, churches were established to help people and not animals. She has no business asking us for money.
And why shouldn't churches help animals, Jim? Animals were created by God even before man was created, and God saw they were good.
That's true, but the Bible says that God created animals for man's use, had man name them, gave man dominion over them. God obviously created animals to serve us. They are not people, they are things. And our laws about them and behaviors towards them reflect how we use our God-given power.
Hold on. I've been checking Google. Genesis 1 does say that God gave man dominion over other creations. You wouldn't believe how many articles and discussions there are about this. But listen to this. Adam had dominion and rule over creation. And within his reign and rule, he had the ability to sustain the good creation. But equally so, Adam had the power to make the good creation crumble? Fran?
Now, I'm happy to step in here for a moment. The word dominion tends to be defined as having ownership and control. However, its origins lie in the early Latin dominus, which means lord or master. The Latin term is derived from Old English words that meant keeper or guardian. When used in a natural context such as God's creation, the word dominion has never had a connotation of abuse of power and exploitation. People tend to compartmentalize things they don't want to address, especially if stepping up to issues means they have to accept responsibilities that are uncomfortable or that bring into question their other behaviors. For many, it's much easier to be a lord or a master with greater power and fewer immediate consequences than it is to be a keeper or guardian, whose role is to protect and preserve for the long term.
I don't remember ever hearing that before, and I'm not sure the rest of the congregation would agree with you.
Well, Jim, I'm one person in this congregation who doesn't agree with you about animals being things. There are too many valid scientific studies that prove what many people know through observation. Dogs are sentient.
Wait, Gary, does Jim even know what that means?
Millie, please.
As I was saying, all animals experience some level of emotion. Many, such as dogs, experience love, fear, sadness. They have legitimate thinking processes, even if they differ from ours. They have language and communication skills, some of which are more complex than ours. They feel pain. Many use crude tools.
You hear that stuff on TV, but who knows if the research is well grounded? And a few years later, a new study comes along that might change everything. And if you believe that sentient stuff, then I guess you must think it only applies to dogs and not to the cows that supply your hamburger meat.
Okay, Jim, that's enough. This is an important discussion, and it will end if we can't keep it civil.
You know, Jim, you may be right about hamburger. I don't know. I've never thought about it, but I certainly will now. And what you said about the research? Well, Jim, you know it's not true. But that doesn't mean that other members of the congregation would be willing to give money to Millie to use for a dog when there are too many people who need help. You know, Millie, the money doesn't have to come from church funds. You could just ask one of us.
You don't get it. This dog's treatment is a public example of what our community will or will not tolerate. This is a litmus test where the results reflect on our moral and ethical values. And I made my request to this church in particular because I really feel that how we condemn, condone, or ignore Morton's actions reflects on how committed we are to the beliefs we hold about God. I thought that asking for a little money to be donated to help foster the dog is within the purview of our church. I meant it as a compliment.
Jim, after hearing Millie, wouldn't you consider this as something our Help the Community Fund might handle?
Seriously, Fran? Helping the community means helping kids and old people, food banks and schools, stuff like that.
Those are all good ways to help, but they may not be the only way. How do you think seeing how this dog is being treated might affect the local children?
The local kids don't notice a dog, and chaining a dog is something they grow up with. It's part of reality. Our treatment of animals has nothing to do with personal morals, community values, or religious beliefs. It certainly has nothing to do with my beliefs. What happened to live and let live? What happened to people being more worried about other people than being worried about animals? Humans have kept dogs on chains since the beginning of time. When I was a kid living in the country, we kept the guard dog and hunting dog confined to chains or kennels because they were valuable, and we let the others run free because they weren't. Running loose didn't help them much. I remember that several were hit and killed by cars just because dogs never seemed to figure out how cars work. It's just nature. But nowadays, everyone seems to think that dogs have to be coddled, wear little sweaters, and eat better than some families. It's crazy, and it shows how out of whack our society has become.
People in society learn and grow over time, Jim. Look at your job over the years. New technology and new information have given you and other business people a better way to do things. Changes have occurred in healthcare and education and almost everything. So now we've learned that chaining a dog goes against its natural instincts. They feel trapped, confined, and they often become stressed and aggressive. Were you aware that almost 25% of fatal dog attacks were from chained dogs?
I didn't know that. But what about the people who chain their dogs because that's all they know? They've been raised to believe that keeping dogs on chains is fine. Maybe they don't have the money to install a fence for their dog. Or maybe the dog isn't easy to train, or the kids are bored with it and it's just in the way. Not every situation is ideal for animals or people.
Now listen here. Violence is violence, even if it's couched as tradition or practicality or ignorance. Children and neighbors do understand what's happening when animals are abused, even if they pretend to ignore it, and even if they are afraid to say anything. It affects them. Ignorance, poverty, or cultural traditions are no excuse for cruelty.
Aren't you being a little judgmental?
I guess I am, but it's hard not to when in our state and in many places in this country and around the world, there are nonprofit groups and multiple resources to help people care for their animals if they don't have the money or they don't know how to train the dog or if they're having problems. The help is there.
And for heaven's sake, who's ever been forced to get a dog? People need to think a bit about what it means to have a pet in the family before they see a cute dog in a movie and then impulsively decide to bring a real one home. You realize, of course, that the Morenton situation is completely different. He's a casual abuser, totally aware of what he's doing and completely unconcerned about the suffering he's causing.
You have all the answers, don't you? And you don't seem to have any problem casting this guy as some kind of criminal just because he doesn't care for an animal the way you want him to. Even if I were to agree to everything you've just said, it has not convinced me that helping this dog has any benefit to our community or our church.
Jim, abuse is abuse, no matter who or what is on the receiving end. This is an act of abusiveness happening in our community. Don't you understand that?
Don't lecture me. You don't seem to understand that the Bible doesn't support animal rescue.
For whoever receives the least among you.
Wasn't that biblical reference made about kids?
It was. But just because the reference is about children, it doesn't mean the concept isn't applicable to all of God's creations.
Good point, Fran. Don't you see, Jim? If we believe, as most people do, that humans are at the top of God's creational hierarchy, then it's clear that those who abuse and neglect animals are using their advantage to harm and control what they perceive to be the weakest level of the hierarchy, or the least among us. And if these same people start to see the next human level in the hierarchy as weak, such as a child or a woman or an elderly person or someone who's disabled, then they may also try to control or even harm them.
Huh. I guess that's why the FBI started a database on animal abusers and why so many courts are coming down hard on those who mistreat animals. Listen to this. There is a proven link between animal abuse and human violence. Studies show that a history of pet abuse is one of the 4 significant indicators of who is at the greatest risk of becoming a batterer.
It doesn't always take a research study to be aware that children exposed to domestic violence are 3 times more likely to be cruel to animals.
Well, Gary, again with the studies. And Helen, when did you become an expert?
My sister suffered through domestic violence with her first husband. I'm remembering what she had to deal with all those years ago. It took a lot of therapy to help my nephew. You see, his father, well, they had a cat that was my nephew's pet when he was young, and the cat died.
I'm sorry, Helen. I didn't mean to bring back bad memories.
No worries, Jim. Unless you've been through it or know someone who has, it's sometimes hard to understand.
There seems to be a lot of data that indicate how we treat animals frequently reflects how we treat each other. This discussion has been very illuminating. Someone once told me that church silence promotes violence to humans, to animals, to our environment. I was deeply offended at the time, but I'm beginning to wonder if he wasn't correct.
I just don't know what to say. The only thing I'm still sure of is that not everyone loves dogs or believes that they or any other animal are here for anything other than our use. And
But
since
not
this...
liking animals, Jim, or not wanting to have a pet, that doesn't give anyone the right to abuse or neglect them.
And since this whole ethical thing has not been talked about in our church, I feel a responsibility to the rest of our congregation to not allow the hard-earned money they donate to go towards helping a dog. There are too many people here and everywhere who need the help that money can provide. And you may not believe this, but I am sorry.
Oh, wait a minute. My phone is getting a text. Just a minute. I got to check it.
So what do we do? Nothing?
Oh no.
What's wrong?
Well, the foster that I've lined up, she just got called out of town for some emergency. She can't take the dog.
Millie, don't panic. I might have a plan that we can all agree to. To begin with, Jim is right that the Church of the Good Shepherd is remiss on not having discussions about the spiritual and moral responsibilities that come with being given dominion over God's other creations. I suspect there are some who don't feel this subject is worthy of being addressed from the pulpit. But it's dawning on me that having such discussions is extremely vital to our spiritual lives and to the health of our community. So I'm going to form a committee to frame and lead those discussions. And Jim, I really want you to be one of the members.
Hey, Fran, sounds like punishment for Jim.
Even though Jim hasn't agreed with everything Millie said, Jim has listened, which is important. And all perspectives must be considered or we won't have true dialogue. I would be very grateful, Jim, if you would serve on the committee.
Sure, sure. You know this church is important to me, Fran. I also think it's important to everyone on this call, even if they are a little misguided.
Thank you, Jim. Now for the rest of the plan. We all know that there are 1,000 different cruelties being inflicted on people and animals at any given time around the world, and it's important not to let that knowledge shut us down. Just because we can't help in all those situations should not keep us from doing what we know to be right when we have an immediate opportunity to act, and especially when that opportunity is in our own backyard. Millie, I think you should buy the dog from Mr. Morton as planned and then bring her here.
I'm confused. I'm not expecting you to foster the dog, Fran. You mean you want to keep her?
Yes, I've always wanted a dog, and I'll pay you back once you brought her. I suspect if Mr. Morton thinks that another person is interested in her, he'll raise the price.
I am so happy. And from what Millie said, you'll need help getting her back in shape. I'll get you a voucher from the pet pantry to pay for her food.
Fran, this is terrific. And please don't pay me back. Use the money to go towards her vet bills because I know she'll need to see a vet. Can you take her this evening?
Of course I can. Bless you both. I can't tell you how much this means to me. And we must not forget Mr. Morrington.
Why not?
He needs our help too, Millie. I would like you to introduce me to him, or perhaps Mrs. Mason can. Not tonight, perhaps next week. And I'd like to meet his other neighbors too. I need to understand him a little better before I decide how best to try and reach him.
I'm a skeptic where he's concerned, Fran, but that's if that's what you want, okay.
Thank you, Millie.
Fran?
Yes, Jim.
Yeah. Well, I have a friend I just contacted who can stop by tomorrow and look at your yard to estimate putting in a small fenced area. Now, I will cover the cost. You can consider it a bribe.
That is extremely generous of you, Jim. But a bribe?
Yeah, well, I want to help with the stupid dog's care as long as you promise never to put little sweaters on her.
You have my word, Jim. I promise. And thank you. Thank you.
I'll help out too, Fran. Let me know when you take the dog to the vet. I'll cover her vet bills.
Gary, given the shape Millie says she's in, that could be quite a lot. I can't pay you back, at least not for most of it.
I'll drop off the check this evening, Fran, when I come over to meet the dog. Please, it's something I'd really like to do.
And I'll get a collar and a leash for her. And I'll walk her for you too when you're busy with church commitments, Fran.
I am so overwhelmed by all of your generosity. Thank you.
Actually, Fran, you can pay me back.
Okay, go on.
My mother loved all animals, and most especially dogs. So I always used to joke that one day I'd name a pet after her. Believe me, she took that as a compliment. But with going to school, then traveling for work, and now being married and having a kid who's allergic to animals here, well, I just haven't had a pet since I left my mom's house. And she passed last year, several months before you came to our church.
What was her name?
Her name was Bridget.
Bridget. A beautiful name. You'd better get going, Millie. Please be careful and hurry because Bridget is waiting.
Okay, I'm going. I'm on my way. I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Be careful.
Take care.
Okay.